Good morning. Welcome to DC Debrief. I'm Scott Mitchell, and this is Alex Cameron. Alex, good to see you. This week, you're back there. Last week, you were here, so no problems traveling, right?
That's right. Back in the district today.
Okay.
Yeah. Good to see you, Scott.
It's good to see you, and you look as good remote as you do in person, so that's an amazing thing. All right. Now, let's start with the news of the week, a couple of them that are big news, and we're going to finish on something that's very nice. That's teased for the long version. All right. President has signed an executive order getting rid of the Department of Education. It's pretty clear about what he wants to do, but the details are in how that's going to be done. What can you tell us?
Well, as you said, he did sign an executive order Thursday afternoon to begin the dismantling of the Department of Education. And exactly how that's going to move forward is not yet clear, but this is something that he's been talking about. He and his supporters have been talking about now for years. They've seen, or at least in their view, the previous administration used the Department of Education to further their, what they call radical, progressive, liberal agenda. With their wokeness in schools, and so they've been determined to do away with that. And in their view, that starts with, or part of that anyway, is doing away with the federal Department of Education. So this executive order basically tells the Secretary of Education to take whatever steps are necessary to eliminate the department. Now, it's not going to eliminate all of the things that the department does. So I know Democrats have been calling this just a huge setback, a very dangerous move that's going to deprive a lot of people of many of the services they get right now through the Department of Education. And it's not clear that that actually will happen, at least according to our delegation. When you talk to them, they say that these things will continue. I spoke specifically about this with Senator Mullen a few weeks ago, and he said, no, the Department of Education, as we know it, is going to change, but, the funding, for instance, that's provided, for schools to accommodate people with disabilities, that's still going to be there. Some of the funding that goes to help lower income schools to stay on a level plane with, wealthier school districts, that's still going to be there. How it's administered might change, and obviously, the department itself may eventually go away, but a lot of the services will still be provided. But really, Scott, the question is, how do they get rid of the Department of Education? It's going to take an act of Congress, because it was Congress that created it back in 1979 during the Carter administration. There were some people who at that time said this was not necessary, it was a bad idea, but it was done, and for the most part, the department has had support of Congress over the years. And so we'll see, but it will be Congress that has to be the one to do away with it. And right now, with the political climate that we have, it's hard to imagine that 7 Democrats would join all 53 Republicans in the Senate to provide the 60 votes that are necessary to eliminate this agency. So legislation, I believe, has already been introduced. It probably can get past the House with a very simple majority needed there, but again, it will need to overcome a filibuster in the Senate, and so it's hard to see that will actually happen there. So again, right now it's really hard to say how this goes, but we know that the Secretary herself has already started whittling away at the department's innards. When President Trump took office, there were about 4,200 employees of the Department of Education, and that's now, as of today, down to about half of that. About 2,100 people were given notices of termination. Some employees accepted the early deferment offers that the administration made. So they have fewer people now to do the work. So we'll see how this plays out. whether people notice differences, but many of the functions supposedly are still going to be in place. And so we'll have to really see, in the districts at the ground level, what sort of impact this ultimately has.
You also had a story this week that I found very interesting, which was that our delegation has had some difficulty, it seems, above the surface. I'm sure below the surface it's much worse, but they've had some difficulty understanding what DOGE is doing, especially when it comes to things like weather forecasting and those sorts of things. You talked to Representative Cole, you talked to Representative Bias. Elon Musk, even in your reporting, came to see Tom Cole. Number one, I'm wondering, did he bring the chainsaw? And number two, what did you tell Congressman Cole, who is one of the most powerful members of the House of Representatives?
Well, according to Congressman Cole, he was in his office. I don't know specifically why the meeting happened, but in that meeting, they spoke not specifically about Oklahoma cuts, but just in general about what DOGE was doing. And Cole says that Musk told him, hey, we're going to make mistakes. We're moving fast. And so that's bound to happen, but we're going to correct our mistakes. And Tom Cole says, he supports what DOGE is doing. He supports what Elon Musk and his group are doing. He believes that there's certainly plenty of room for improvement in the efficiency of our federal government. And so he says, what am I going to tell a guy who says I'm coming in here to try and eliminate waste and save money for the taxpayers? Am I going to tell him don't do it? He says no. But he says, people like him have to be ready to approach his group and say, no, this is wrong. He says, I may look at some of the things they're saying and saying, that's good, but no, wait, hold on, that's bad, and here's why you shouldn't do that. And I asked him, I said, the fact that you're in the majority, you have a leadership role, does that give you access that maybe others wouldn't have? And he says, no, anyone can, Democrat, Republican, any member can contact DOGE and make their case. He says, that's what I did in the case of the National Weather Service, and that's what others have the ability to do, and they listen. And he says, in the case of the National Weather Center, I explained to them what the situation was, and they said, you know what, you're right. Musk has admitted they're going to make mistakes, but he says they will correct them, and our delegation is on board with that. Clearly there's been some frustration. Congresswoman Bice is certainly frustrated with, how the whole idea of, disposing of the Oklahoma City federal building came to light. She felt like that was rushed, and it's not even clear that was a DOGE process, but nevertheless, it indicates, just the speed with which this administration is moving to try and divest federal assets and shrink the size of the federal government, and whether they're going too fast. Again, our delegation is very firmly behind this whole idea of shrinking the size, the footprint of the federal government, but definitely some frustration on how fast it's going, how in some cases a little bit reckless, but I think that they believe, with their activism and involvement, bad decisions will be avoided.
I'm sure that any congressperson can reach out to DOGE, but I doubt that anybody but the appropriations chair is going to be getting an in-person visit. Last, let's talk about something that 4K television was made for, the Cherry Blossom Festival in DC. You've covered this before. This is an incredible story about how those came to be. I don't know that they have the allergens that red cedars have, and they're one heck of a lot more nicer to look at.
Yeah, the cherry trees are getting ready to blossom here in DC. This is tradition that goes back more than 100 years to 1912, when the mayor of Tokyo made a gift of 3,000 cherry trees to this city as a symbol of friendship between Japan and the United States. This has just grown in popularity. There are still about that same, there's actually a little bit fewer than that number of trees at this point around the tidal basin in Washington, D.C., just over 2,000. But it's quite a sight. And, you know, if you've seen it before, you know how beautiful it is. And if you haven't, boy, it's actually something that you ought to think about trying to come and see in person. So right now, peak bloom is predicted for a week from today, basically, a week from this weekend. The National Park Service always comes out about around the end of February to kind of make their prediction about when peak bloom will be. The last few years, it's been rather early. Last year, it was the second earliest peak bloom ever. I think it was like March 17th, around St. Patrick's Day. This year, again, they're saying March 28th is when peak bloom will happen. And the blossoms stay on the trees. You know, it depends on the weather. If you get a lot of wind, if you get a lot of rain, they don't last as long, but they can be on there and it can be very beautiful for a couple of weeks, and certainly for a good solid week. So yeah, it's getting ready to happen. It's going to bring in well over 1 million people to this city over the next couple of weeks. There's a huge festival with lots of different events, music, games, races, you know, concerts. So it's a lot of, there's a lot going on, but be prepared to deal with crowds, and good luck finding a hotel room at this point, Scott. They're all booked.
Sounds like a wonderful thing to cover. Can't wait to see the story. And here's a hint to the Park Service, who's not real happy with Musk right now. He can come see, just don't let him bring a chainsaw anywhere near those cherry trees. Alex, thanks. We'll see you next week.
They're keeping him away.
Absolutely.